The Sage Women podcast shares real conversations with women and health professionals, and it's for anyone navigating the ups and downs of midlife. Hey, it's Melanie White on the Sage Women podcast. Excuse my appearance if you're watching this on video. I've had some wisdom teeth out and there's a bit of puffing and bruising on the face, but never mind. I'm here today with Kylie Ingram, who's the CEO of Wizer Business. Kylie, thanks for being here today.
You're welcome. And I've been told not to make her laugh because it hurts. So I will try and refrain from being funny at you, poor thing.
We always have a laugh when we're together. So yes, let's not make it too 2:30.
We'll be serious today.
We will. And just to frame today's episode, I guess this conversation for this podcast came up because we were talking about communication styles in women. And that's kind of really interesting because there's a lot of backstory to that. And you've been seeing some really interesting trends. So maybe we can start with what it is that you're seeing and how you're capturing that before we go any further.
Yeah, sure. So we at Wizer are looking at decision intelligence, really, about who should be in the room during decisions. And one of the product we have that kind of all our technology sits around are decision profiles, which came from the fabulous Juliet Burke's research, which two heads are better than one. What a legend of a woman. And anyway, we've got this product and somebody asked us a few months ago, could they use the decision profiles to work out how to communicate with people? And we said, yes. So we developed a product called Wizer Snaps, where you can go in and get somebody's decision profile with them not doing it. You type in what you know about them. It then tells you what the likelihood of their decision profile is and reshapes your messaging, starts to talk about your messaging and how you're talking to them.
So that you reach them more effectively by kind of going into their style with your message.
Yeah. So there's 7 archetypes and some people want figures, some people want to know about the risk. There's a whole lot of things we've learned since then, which we can dig into. And we've just also released a Chrome extension for LinkedIn. So you can click on somebody's LinkedIn profile and analyze, and it'll come up with a probability of that. But when you and I spoke, which kind of started this conversation, I said, the strangest thing is happening when it has changed since then. But we had exclusively women using the product when we first launched it. So it kind of led you and I to scratch our heads and go, what on earth is going on here? I've never had a product like that before where it was so gender weighted.
That's really interesting. So women are looking at their words, how they're saying things, being considered and careful, crafting their messages before they send anything out to people, but not men.
When we spoke to the women that were using it, wasn't just the messaging, it was before they were going into meetings, especially. I think, a lot of it is, it gave them, often they said it gave them a sense of calmness before they went into the, look, whether something's going to be wrong or right, you just want as much information sometimes as you can get before you go in, and having them understand what kind of decision maker they were able to adapt and plan out the ask or whatever it was. So that was a really interesting use case. So it's not necessarily, the tool's not made for mass, it's made for the bit where you're getting to the pointy end of who's on the other end of the line, or who's in the meeting, or this email that has to land. How do you frame it so it's heard?
Really interesting. There's a lot that we can use to frame the issue. But before we do that, I'd love to just know, I always like to ask people on the podcast, why are you doing this work? I know that you have a work and life history in communication and media, but tell us a little bit about how you got to this point with Wizer and why communication matters to you so much.
Well, Wizer, my background was in TV, and then I went into interactive, creating interactive products. And I kind of like it because you can tell pretty quickly whether somebody's going to use them, whereas TV shows can take years to make and you don't kind of know. I really like that iterative process. And one of the projects I worked on was called Crowd TV. It used to baffle me when you go into these meetings with these there's very few in Australia people that hold the power to what's going to be on TV, and it can seem frustrating. So we made Crowd TV and made our own show, and it went really well. So when my co-founder came to me and said, I've got an idea about using Wise Crowd and what that looks like, it was appealing to me, because when you see who's making, or you every day, you're like, how did that decision get made? When you drill down into it, there's often very few people involved, or you think, how did they not, like Boeing at the moment, they've taken the engineers out of the room, things are falling off planes. How did they think that taking an engineers out of the room was a good idea? So it's that kind of thing, that there's nothing that says you're included more than being in a decision. So I think I'd already started to think about that Wise crowd and who is there when people are making decisions. And I just think the world could be a better place if we included the right people in the room for decisions, rather than, same old thinkers in the room. And that led me to Juliet Burke's research, and she's obviously done a lot about who should be in the room, which increases, your innovation by 20%, reduces your decision error rate by 30%. So leaders that are willing to look and examine about those rooms is important. And then, as I was saying, a charity came to us and said, could we use this decision profiling for communication? And it was kind of like, how are you doing it now? And since then, I've analyzed hundreds and hundreds of bequest things, and you realize how far off they are, especially for, if 75% of our, what Juliet found, 75% of our CEOs are in Western society, are achievers or deliverers. These emails are not being written for these people. So, it's important to write the communication that lands. And then with the added thing of AI at the moment, there's so much out there. And it's, what do they call it? AI slop. Like, how do you get to the point where we're back to meaningful communication? You can show that respect for the person, that you've actually thought about, who they are, even if you don't get it right, who they are, and how you want to speak to them. I think the only way forward for saving us all is, community and caring for one another. And I think this is part of that.
It's such a great point, isn't it? It's that really communication is a global, I don't want to call it a concern, but it kind of is. We all care about how we're received. We all want to get a message that lands at work, particularly when we're having a sensitive conversation. I used to think it was just me worrying about, would I get my words right? But I hear hundreds and hundreds of women particularly saying, oh, I just want to get my words right, or I don't always get my words right. And I'm thinking, wow, that's a huge thing. But it does make a difference. And as you say, having that diversity of voices is important, not just for innovation and getting great decisions, but also we have this systemic bias. And I suppose if we were to frame this issue, we have the same words but different judgments, being a woman versus a man in a leadership role, let's say. And if women are expected to be kind and friendly and warm and nurturing, but if they're saying no, if they're pushing back, if they're assertive, then they're seen differently than a man who would be in the same way. And if we have a system of leadership that's male dominated, then it's hard for a woman to fit into that.
Yes. And I mean, there's so much research on that. It's not it's not funny. And you look at the LinkedIn numbers at the moment with people changing their genders, and was it a Guardian or the Telegraph in the UK? She put a mustache on herself, changed the numbers, and her impressions went up almost 2,500%. And Cindy Gallup's been doing it. People have been swapping genders. And so it can make you feel insane sometimes to think, why is it not being received? And so there's so much societal pressure on that. At least if you can understand how they do receive things from a cognitive standpoint, it does help you a lot. Like if they're an analyzer, lead with what you know about, the stats. If they're risk orientated, shoot long term. But with the people person, Juliet never put it in a book, I think, because the people, we call them collaborators, and they're not people, but they understand the value of people in a decision, if that distinction makes sense. Yeah. And there actually isn't that much of a difference between men and women. I think right now with the decision profiles we're seeing, it's 5%. Juliet saw less of a difference than that. But there is this massive social assumption, which also leads me to believe women are behaving the way they think they should. As you're saying, they think they should behave because of the way people perceive what women are saying.
Yeah, the gender stereotypes, the cultural norms that discuss how people think we should be showing up and how we should be behaving. And so what you're saying then, just go back a step, you said you're seeing only a 5% difference between men and women in your decision profiles. What does that actually mean for somebody that's not familiar with Wizer Business?
I'm just talking about the people. Like, I think there's an assumption a lot more women would be people orientated. Like, you often see people, the people collaborators in marketing jobs and things like this, which is another point we can come to about how messages are being written that we're seeing. But there actually isn't that much of a difference between men and women as collaborators. And Juliet found it really small and didn't put it in a book because she didn't want to make too much of it. And we've just done our decision profile numbers for 2025, and we saw a 5% difference, women being the higher number of collaborators. But our data is not real still because it's people that have chosen to do, you know what I mean? There's the data.
Yeah, there's an inherent bias.
Interesting, but it's people that have chosen to do their decision profiles, which is, not necessarily a mass representation of the larger. I mean, that's 5,300 things, so it's significant, but not still skewed.
I don't know if you know, but what proportion of the people that are on your platform are in leadership roles?
Well, we think it's higher than normal because of how many achievers and deliverers and visionaries we have in there. We know that it skews high. Which is something we've kind of just written about in our report. So that also skews the data a little bit. Mm. But if you're looking at the percentage of collaborators, it's 5% difference.
Right. That's interesting. So inherently there may be less of a difference in types of people than we think between men and women.
Well, yeah, I mean, in Juliet's book, she wrote, I like the Enron case study where she was talking about Enron had what they would consider a diverse board. And, they had a woman and they had a man of color but what they didn't test was cognitive diversity. And women are just as capable of being achievers, that women are, when they're at the top, are achievers too. So there's this whole thing called cognitive drift. We end up with that same people at the top, and that's not a gender thing. That's how we're choosing leaders and how they're choosing themselves and likes. So Enron had a board and they went very quickly to a very poor decision because they were all exactly the same type of thinkers.
That's so interesting. And I'm also now thinking about different professions as well. I mean, we have stereotypes of the computer nerd and the science geek wearing the lab coat. And I heard this a long time ago before I even knew about the importance of diversity in companies, that if you have certain sectors have basically a monoculture of types that prefer certain types of work. But that, as a biologist, I think of the risks associated with the monoculture, that a virus comes through and your whole crop's gone, for example, or your whole population of animals is affected. We really do need the diversity to have an inherent strength in our community or our population to keep it going. It's so important.
Yeah, we do. And a company's the same. And part of the biggest societal problem at the moment too is we've got all these very companies that do very well by keeping us apart, or we call them conflict entrepreneurs. Their business model is made by creating rage between us, and you can't run an organization like that. You have to bring your people together to work well. And there's Juliet's cognitive diversity piece, which are the decision profiles, but We also look at the outward-facing diversity, which includes gender and age and ethnicity for different things, and then the experience things. So we're always, when somebody's asking a decision through our platform, we're always measuring it in that way. And we can tell them live if, there's no engineers or there's only people over 65 or whatever the thing might be. It's then up to them our recommendation engine can tell them who, but it's then up to them to change it. And we do see them, they can see where they're going wrong. And it's not emotional, it's science. It's trying to say scientifically you'd have a better outcome if you included these people.
Yeah, there's the research backing behind that. It's very interesting what you've just spoken about, these conflict entrepreneurs, I think you called them, and the importance of us really pulling together and collaborating. And at the base of this, I know we've spoken a lot about women's health allyship and using Wizer for that purpose to bring people together. But if we went back to the Gender Compass research that was completed earlier this year, they spoke a lot about how do we engage the movable middle on the spectrum of people from the activist through to the rejecter of supporting women's health for whatever reason. There's that ambivalent sector in the middle. And of course, the finding was we need to meet people where they're at. And that also means using the right language, tying into the foundational beliefs that bring us together, the shared values like belonging, trust, security, respect, those sorts of things. So I think it's really important that we consider communication, that we have tools to help us be a bit more thoughtful about the way we speak. And I know that there's, I did want to mention that fact that in midlife, women are more frequently being diagnosed with ADHD, and the Fog and the Fury podcast has more detail on that. But it's interesting what happens in the context of communication for that, because as part of ADHD, you have less executive function. It takes you longer to process things, more thinking time's required, and some women have this rejection sensitive dysphoria, RSD, which means they're become really anxious and averse about being disliked or treated badly or ditched or whatever. I'm probably not using the right words here, but just here we go, me not using the right words. They become more sensitive to criticism and so on. And so imagine being in midlife and you've got ADHD and you're heading into a meeting or you're about to write an email and you're thinking, oh, how am I going to do this in a way that I'm not shut down? People don't think I'm an idiot. So you're thinking that way. And then you have the double whammy of poor executive function or poorer executive function, affected cognition, slower processing time. So you're perhaps more sensitive to criticism and less equipped to be able to communicate clearly. I think there's a real need for women at this age to get some support with their communication so that it's not communication labor. It becomes giving people some tools to help them lighten the cognitive load, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. And we spoke about this a little bit before we went in, so I did come prepared. So I didn't lose my words, but I guess we were trying to work out, some of the, maybe there's 3 steps I can think of to help make that messaging help you a little bit. And maybe the first thing, because a lot of the AI we're using, AI writing tools, what they're doing is they're clarifying your message. They're making you write better, which is fantastic, especially when you don't have time. But don't assume clarity is the problem, because it's not. At this point, it's not because the message is unclear, but because you've framed it potentially for the wrong listener. So, if you can figure out somebody's decision profile, set that up, because you can then go to point 2, which is what does the other person want to hear first and how do they make that decision? So, there might be a way of structuring it. You'll see it in the rewrites that Wizer Snaps gives you as to how you come at them to get their attention and what to lead with. Don't bury the stuff that attacks their cognitive, is the thing that will talk to their cognitive difference. You start there and go from there. And then the third thing I'd say is optimize for movement, not agreement. So, know what you want to do. Don't worry. I think, I think about this a lot, about women trying to be agreeable and how much we say sorry and stuff. Don't worry about that harmony or whatever. Where do you want to get to? And just be a bit bolder about that into what you're doing, because you know how they decide. You've framed it right now. Be bold about where you want to get to is what I would suggest.
Mm. Speak up. And I think when you do that, when you are a bit bold, suddenly it kind of brings your messaging together a bit more. You have a confidence that, if we look at, there's a great article by Quantum Impact Group, by the way, on power and the challenges that women face. And they talk in that blog about how important confidence is, because there's your positional power, your personal power, all these different sorts of power, but it's how you show up. It's your presentation, it's your body language, it's your confidence that is part of that, making an impact and being seen. So as you're saying, keeping it, knowing what you want and going for it, I think by proxy just gives you that sense of conviction. I know what I want. I know what I want to get. And suddenly it helps just to clarify and make things a bit easier.
Well, there's a couple of hypotheses that we've thrown around about why men didn't use the tool in it, because they're not that worried about how they will be perceived before they go in. So they're not carrying all that extra load of what it is probably why they weren't using the tool that women are. So if you've got your ducks in a line, just walk in there with the confidence of a man. No, just go for it.
It's a bit of an evolution. It makes me think, years ago I had a boyfriend and he was so confident, and we were talking about confidence, and I said, God, when I walk into a party, I think, oh, everyone's looking at me and I'm uncomfortable and a whole bunch of people are better than me. And he said, oh, that's interesting. I'll walk into a room and think, no one's better than me. And it's just such a great illustration of how particularly young men and women perceive themselves differently. And I know that Dr. Sarah Mackay has done a bit of work on this, and she teaches this in some of her courses about the perceptions that women have of their capability and their intelligence. Really interesting to follow that, but that's a whole other rabbit hole, I suppose. I guess, Kylie, one other thing we talked about offline, which we haven't mentioned here, is difficult people. Now, everyone's got a difficult person that they have to deal with, right?
Yes, they do.
And what do you do? How do you approach that person?
The numbers since we spoke, men are using the platform now, and the ones that I've asked what they're doing, it is that sales and business development and the client managers that are getting to the end. But the other really, interesting piece was they said, men and women, we've all got the difficult people. And, if you Google online, what should I do with difficult people? Oh, you should, do this or that. But really, if we just accept some people are just incredibly difficult, they've got zero self-awareness, conversation's always about them. It's not, do what you want to do. But one of the ways that it's been, reframing communication is focus on what their decision profile is. The other thing you're not going to change, but if you can shape the focus to be around the way they're going to make a decision, it shifts the work from that emotional effort to a strategic framing. And they're not going to change. People can get on and say they will change or whatever. I'm just in the bucket that can change and I can't be bothered. So focus on the problem about how they make decisions makes it a whole lot easier. And that was something that we were chatting to the men that are using the thing for about, how do I approach this, or how do I reply to this ridiculous email? Like, you've all had them and you're just like, they can be gut-wrenching sometimes when you get them from difficult people. Well, Snaps will rewrite it for you, work out what kind of decision maker they are and rewrite it, and hopefully take some of the edge off off the thing, just keep it in their decision framework rather than, the emotional lift of difficult people. So it's been really interesting, that kind of case study on it.
Yeah, and I love that idea of taking away the emotional labor and making it a strategic framework instead. And, as we're talking, what comes to mind is what you're doing with Wizer Snaps and Wizer Business is basically building on Marketing 101. If we're thinking about marketing communication generally, it's all about what's in it for them.
Yeah,
and to do that, we have to know what kind of person are they? What are they looking to get out of it? How can I communicate with them about what I'm doing on my offer that resonates with them and makes sense to them? And then you're just providing a tool that helps to figure that out more precisely. And it's not like going into one of the common AI platforms around, because we've all used those, and I've seen some pretty funky things come out of that. And I've been copied in on emails where it says, please send this to Melanie with a warm, engaging tone at the top, which is not what you want to see before you send an email to someone.
No, and the AI writing tools are making, a bit assumptions around clarity, which is important, but they're optimizing for the better writing and ignoring how people think. Or if you do ask them, there's some tools out there that will rewrite it they're rewriting your tone, or they're rewriting for the tone of the person, but the tone of that person, how they write, isn't even how they're making decisions.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is you've then got a couple of things that look at personality. And if, I just met this guy recently, James Healy, who wrote BS at Work, and we were having a big discussion about personality profiles, disc being made by the woman who's married to Mr. Wonder Woman. And they were all, made that. And then the woman that made Myers-Briggs didn't like her daughter's boyfriend. So other than the big five, there's not a lot of my understanding, not a lot of scientific backing of this stuff. So then there's more assumptions thrown into the mix about how to talk to people, which is quite funny.
It really is a big need, isn't it? Because the world would be so different if we could communicate more clearly and in a more relatable way to the person we're speaking to. If we can remove some of those barriers with a tool that saves us the emotional cognitive load, puts it into a strategic framework, helps us to get a message across and feel confident that we're clear on what we want and how it's going to be received.
And you're talking to people that
just
do
a
send out
relief.
people that do send out a lot of messages have kind of said, wow, we've only got to have 7 buckets of frameworks now or templates now, rather than the arbitrary buckets people being put in, a CEO of this, of that. And, it's changed the way they think. The other thing we've noticed is the people that are writing the messages are, I think, collaborators, because it's closely linked to the way the message is coming out. So the messages align most, whereas they're least aligned with achievers, analyzers, and guardians. So you're way off track with almost all of these emails that we've analysed, hundreds of them now, out of the charity sector. They're that far away from those other emails, which is interesting in itself as to who's in that bucket that you're missing. Or maybe they're just accepting that those emails sound like that and get on with it.
Yeah. I think the work that you're doing and this conversation is so important, because at the heart of everything, not just at work, but in society, community, all of the things that are happening in the world, the discord, the divisiveness, we need a common language. We need better communication. I'm thinking also women in menopause who are struggling to get their words out, and they're worried about what people are thinking of them and how they're feeling about themselves. There are so many reasons why people could use a tool like this to help them be clearer and just calmer about their communication. So I really love the work that you're doing, Kylie. Do you have any last thoughts before we wrap up this session today?
No, I just think it's about that, isn't it? Our online selves as humanity can be pretty grim. Like, remember that we're all people and we're all part of something. And I think if we can communicate to one another you know, especially when we're not face to face. I think people are very nice when we're face to face. Let's improve that. And if Wizer can help in any way in that, I'm just, it's a fantastic outcome. And thank you for having me today.
It's been my pleasure, Kylie. I look forward to seeing where your work goes and what happens with it in 2026.
Thank you very much. And I hope your teeth feel better. Your cheeks feel better.
Yeah, thanks. Looks like someone grabbed me around the chin.
Wasn't it?
Thanks, Kylie.
All right. Take care. Thanks,